When was the last time you called up one of your fire team members and say, hey, we're doing GMs tonight? Bring Salvation's Grip. Probably never. And dude, I feel crazy to even recommend people this exotic, especially if you have not played with it since its huge rework not that long ago. But the reason why we're looking at Salvation's Grip is because next week we have the Into the Light update, and we're gonna have a new game mode called Onslaught. This is a horde mode with 50 waves that progressively get harder, which is why we've been build crafting so much here lately, and why we're speculating that Salvation's Grip may be worth using next week. Today though, guys, we're gonna be going over its most recent buff, but we're also gonna be taking this a step further. We're gonna be combining this with our artifact mods, which yes, we have 2 stasis artifact mods that greatly benefit stasis, and we're also gonna be pairing this with builds. Dim links down below, fellas. For my hunters, I'm sorry, no build for you. Not saying you can't utilize it. This is just more gauge for my titans and warlocks. Again though, for my hunters, we did put out a Mothkeeper build. Feel free to check that out. With that being said though, let's talk about Salvation's Grip and the 2 buffs it received just recently. Now I'm gonna go over some of the basics of this weapon if you've forgotten, or perhaps you just haven't played with Salvation's Grip since its rework. But its exotic intrinsic reads, hold a charge, release to fire. This weapon's charged projectiles create a pattern of stasis crystals on impact and freeze nearby targets, which is what you're seeing here in front of you. Now it's fantastic for locking down areas and groups of enemies. You could stun champions with it, or just lock them in place, but it's after everything has been locked down that the exotic trait on Salvation comes into play. This weapon's uncharged projectiles deal bonus damage to stasis crystals, as well as frozen targets. Rapidly destroying multiple stasis crystals reloads this weapon from reserves. Now this damage increase is 37% to frozen targets, going from 53,215 damage to a whopping 73,171 damage here at Carl, which is not a small number. On top of that, the reload looks to be the entire magazine when you destroy just 3 crystals. And remember guys, shattered damage can tack on quite a bit of lethality here. Just looking over the numbers real quickly, when destroying a crystal next to Carl, it deals around an extra 7,000 shattered damage. So by itself, Salvation's Grip has some very nice synergy within its own kits, and it works really well as a means to set them up and then knock them down. But why are we suddenly recommending Salvation's Grip now? In update 7.3.5, heavy grenade launchers saw 2 massive changes. One was an increase in damage, the other was a massive reserve bump. Now let me just talk about that increase in damage. I know that on the patch notes it stated that there was an increase in heavy wave grenade launcher damage by 20% and an increase in heavy wave grenade launcher wave width by 40%. Unfortunately, even though Salvation's Grip is technically a wave frame, it did not get hit by this. However, what it did get hit by was the buff that Bungie hit to all grenade launchers, where they increased the direct hit impact damage by 10% and they increased the detonation damage by 5%. And this was to offset the big nerf that they did to spike grenades. But what this did was roll over into Salvation's Grip damage, thus netting us about a 6% increase in damage from an uncharged grenade projectile. Now, even though that's really nice, it's the reserve ammo bump that's going to be the most appreciated. You see, Salvation's Grip pre 7.3.5 only held 16 shots at base. Now it holds a whopping 24. Now you can rock max reserves if you want, but this really only knocks it up to 28. Really, 24 is plenty though. And if there was one big gripe I had with Salvation's Grip pre-update, was that its ammo economy was just so poor. Now though, you can let those shots fly. Now this opens up the door to many stasis builds, as the synergy here is beautiful. But before we get into that, we need to answer the question, why are we using this and stasis? Remember I mentioned that Onslaught is going to be the horde mode next week? Well, inside of that horde mode, the whole premise is us defending one objective, that being the ADU. Now there's going to be a variety of things that we're going to be using next week and trying out, but without a doubt, stasis is going to play a big role in this. When it comes to crowd control and locking areas down, especially physically locking an area down, nothing does it better than stasis. Slowing, freezing, all of this can halt the enemy's push, allowing for you and your team to get set up to take them out. But what makes Salvation's Grip so good is that it can exclusively create these physical barriers that can quite literally stop enemies from advancing. We saw a lot of gameplay of Onslaught on the altered Midtown map, and this is exactly where one of the ADUs is placed. And you can see how something like Salvation's Grip can totally plug up each one of these lanes. If we've got a doorway, there's literally no way they're getting in. And I'm actually gonna try to surround the entire ADU with stasis crystals. Now, when we start combining this with stasis itself, our grenades, our shatter damage, our exotics, builds, and especially artifact mods, this is when we get into build territory. I'm gonna start with our artifact mods first. The 2 we wanna focus on are Pillar of Ice and Hell the Storm. Pillar of Ice reads that defeating a frozen target spawns stasis crystals. Now, no, this isn't super crazy, but it just means more crystals while we're slaying outs, which of course means more crowd control and more lethality. The big one, however, though, is Hell the Storm. This one reads that shattering frozen targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage, and shattering stasis crystals releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. Now, there's a lot that happens with this mod, but looking at the shatter damage increase, our shatter damage from earlier was 7,103. When we put on Hell the Storm, this is a 21% increase in damage, kicking us up to 8,607. Now, this alone makes this mod worth its weight. But here's the kicker. Salvation's Grip and Stasis as a whole is all about shattering our crystals and our frozen enemies. Now we've got 21% extra damage. But then we have these secondary effects, which are these ice shards that you see right here. Now, they don't do like too much, but they do tag on an extra bit of damage whenever you shatter a crystal. So again, nothing we're gonna say no to. And honestly, I feel like Bungie is playtesting both Pillar of Ice and Hell the Storm as like future add-ins to our Stasis subclass at some point. Now, what is the best build to utilize with this? Guys, you're seeing this gameplay right here. I'm utilizing this inside of Grandmaster Nightfalls. For Warlocks though, I think it's pretty obvious. Stacy. Now guys, this is a no-brainer. Stacy has been good now ever since the Glassway strike, and we needed to find a way to lock down the ads. And this was like pre-Osmiomancy. Now, this particular build makes use of both the Bleak Watcher aspect and Ice Flare bolts. This allows us to literally freeze everything. Now, normally our exotic of choice is Verglass Curvier, but in this case, we're utilizing Salvation's Grip. And this is allowing us to put out more stasis crystals on demand, which means more grenades thanks to Whisper of Shards, which gives us a whopping 500% increase in grenade regeneration. Now, you may be wondering, what are we going to use in that kinetic slot since we're not using Verglass like we normally would? Well, guys, this perfectly sets things up for Mountaintop. Now, I know we have a time gate. Things are going to be time gated for the next 3 weeks. And unfortunately, Mountaintop is not going to be part of that initial drop of those weapons next Tuesday. But when it does drop, can you imagine the combination of frozen targets, of stasis crystals, and a micro missile to throw in there? It's going to be beautiful, man. And we're actually collecting a list of builds to utilize for next week that we believe are going to be really good. But let me just say, for my Warlocks, you cannot go wrong with this Osmiomancy Stacy build. Whether it's dropping the grenades down as stasis turrets or literally throwing the grenade at an enemy directly. And again, if you make direct impact with the enemy, this will return even more grenade energy. And it can get pretty ridiculous because you can just throw these grenades over and over. Now for my Titans. We've done a stasis build in the past, even for things like Grandmasters. Hoarfrost has been one of our go-to exotics. I know Stasis seems like a passive playstyle, but Hoarfrost really flips that on its head. You see, this exotic and the combination of aspects like Howl the Storm and Tectonic Harvest allows you to play aggressively with this Stasis build. You can freeze and create crystals with your Glacier Grenade, as well as your melee and class ability. Then when we start to sprinkle in Salvation's Grip, do you see how crazy the amount of Stasis crystals you can erect? Then when we slap on Whisper of Fissures, which boosts our shatter damage even more, this nets us an additional 27% increase in our damage, cranking it up to 10,888 here at Carl. Everything here is compounding. You can use this build to either rush in and shatter everything, or you can even take the defensive approach and just smother the battlefield with even more crystals. Guys, again, if you're interested in either one of these builds, down below is dim links to both of these. What I will say though is that Salvation's Grip did get a nice buff. Its reserve ammo buff is going to be the most noticeable one for you. And I don't know how crazy Onslaught is going to be next week, but I'm assuming when we get up to waves 40 and plus, especially in the legend mode, this is going to really test our best builds. And in my opinion, having a good stasis build paired with a good stasis weapon like Salvation's Grip, you'll be completely locking down the battlefield. So guys, try it out for yourselves. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.